Hello everybody, welcome back to the Frostcast, presented by Frostbolt Digital Media. Our guest today is Viv Naidoo, who has over 15 years of industry experience within the sales, supply chain and distribution sectors. He is also the owner of his own premium meat business, Familifood, which has been established for over 30 years. Today, we'll be talking about how to streamline the fulfillment process of your business, minimizing product wastage, key differences between being a corporate team member and the leader of your own business, and much more. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to make sure you're not missing out on valuable insights from industry experts and business leaders across the globe.
Hi Viv, thanks for coming on the Frostcast with us. It's great to have you here. Just to get started, tell us a little bit about the Family Foods business and what you guys do.
Yeah, for sure. Josh, Raul, thanks for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity. Family Food is a 30-year-old company. We do sales of premium meats, restaurant quality products that are portion controlled direct to households. So it's still primarily door-to-door sales. And you can think about the team has been 30 years old, going in and knocking on doors and just generating revenue and selling really good quality product. So I purchased the business about 5 months ago. So it's been an interesting journey and taking it from where it was to where we are currently and making some nice little changes in terms of processes and procedures to get more optimized results going forward.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that just because I know you've got a lot of experience with logistics and moving around physical items and how to sort of streamline those processes. One of the first questions I have for you is, if I was starting a physical products business tomorrow or next week, what are some of the easy pieces of advice you can give someone to sort of streamline their processes for fulfilling orders?
So I think one of the critical points that you probably want to look at is when you talk about streamlining the fulfillment process, I can probably go on for hours on this, right? But I'm going to try and give you guys like a quick and easy summary of what I think is going to work. And essentially, it starts with a sales forecast, whichever organization you're in, and generally, you're in a large corporate, medium-sized corporate, or even a small corporate, it helps to have a sales forecast. And, you can start with something that is fairly month-to-month basis, build it out for a year, and then eventually drill that back down to at least weekly. Now, if you're using a sales forecast and if you're brand new in business and it's a completely new business, it's kind of hard, but it makes sense to take an estimate because you're actually, doing this based on business case, etc. If you've got past sales history, you're smiling. And the one thing I've learned, like coming into Family Food and taking my corporate experience into play, was Family Food. When I came in here, the previous owner was saying to me, just purchase 10 cases of this, 10 cases of that, 5 cases of this. And I'm like, okay, but how much is that in terms of weeks of supply? And that is something that's critical. When you start looking at how much of inventory are you carrying, how many weeks is it going to take you to sell that stock? That's one thing that one has to really look at. So what I've done is I threw my entire sales data into a spreadsheet, and I looked at our inventory, just divided the two, and then I could get my sales and stock on hand in terms of weeks of supply. And we keep a minimum of, or a maximum rather, of 2 weeks of stock. And so at the end of the day, what I found is the previous owner was keeping well above $80,000 worth of inventory, and I was able to really streamline and bring that down in terms of cost, just based on the fact that we're not ordering the same amount for every single thing. And as sales update and go up and down, you can play around with your inventory, right? The other things to look at is look at supplier lead times. If you can drop down some of the supplier lead times, that's something that will really help you, minimize out of stocks. Depending on whether you're, importing product. If you're importing product from other countries, that's like a 3-month process. If it's somebody that's local, and most of our suppliers still import the product and have it local or manufacturing and processing product for us here, some of their lead times were over 2 weeks. And so I was like, why is it over 2 weeks? Could we reuse it? And some of the practical examples I took from this was we had a customer that did organic chicken for us. And only when she got an order would she be processing that, getting how much raw material, and then taking 2 weeks to do it. I'm like, we order from you every single month. So how about I tell you, these are my, 2 months worth of stock. You make it up front. You keep it on hand. You have space on hand. Yeah, shit. So I've got space on hand. Great. And then you can ship it to me, and then you get your production all sorted out. She was very happy with that. And I don't wait 2 weeks any longer. So I now get my stock shipped to me within 2 days. So those are some of the things. It's like working with your suppliers to just try and take out those sort of timelines.
Interesting about what you said there, Viv, was we spoke to someone on the last episode of our podcast, and he made he's in sports apparel, but still a physical product. He said the amount of product you can afford to buy is the amount you can afford to sell when with regards to sort of upscaling and growing your sales over time, which I thought was an interesting caveat to what you were just saying about like getting your 2-month stock on hand.
So it's different. If you're in a growth phase of your business, yes, the amount of stuff you can buy equals to the amount of stuff that you can sell. But when you're sitting with 106 different products, right? And there's, there's seasonality, and every business will tend to see that seasonality. What you'll see is that we tend to sell a lot more steaks during summer, right? During winter, a lot less steaks. So my stock is going to reduce based on the amount of sales that I have past winter. So I'd take seasonality into play.
I can just imagine with sort of like food-based products and perishables, it's particularly difficult finding that balance. I think with, clothes and those kind of things that aren't perishable, they obviously have like a shelf value that just sort of depreciates over time. But I think particularly with food, particularly with what you're dealing with, specifically with meat and things that can obviously, I guess, go off quite quickly. I suppose it's a particularly hard balance finding that. What you've been talking about actually kind of leads on into the sort of second question really of the podcast, and in the sense of how do you minimize wastage in your business?
So, Raul, I think you touched on it. At the end of the day, depending on the shelf life of your product, you could have really high wastage depending on the accuracy of your sales forecast or the inaccuracy of your sales forecast. You can also have really high wastage, right? So the reality behind it is that if you look at the shelf life that we have, so for most frozen products, it's a year and even longer. And when you consider that, that's something that you can either really stock up on and you're hardly ever going to lose any inventory, right? But for me, the whole idea, and I just mentioned to you, right? We keep 2 weeks worth of inventory. So I'm wanting to have consistent turn of product all the time. And I think that's good stock management. The other thing that we try to do is we do something which is an ABC analysis or product portfolio optimization, right? So product portfolio optimization would be a very simple thing where, you look at an ABC analysis. And in past life, it was, okay, here's all your A SKUs, which are 20% of your volume, 20% of your SKU number, but giving you 80% of your volume. Whichever business I've been in, this always replicates. There's always that 80-20 rule. The B lines would be, those last 15% of the SKUs that give you, or 5% of the SKUs going to give you 15% of the volume. And then your C line, 100 plus SKUs that are really 0.001 per SKU of volume, right? So what I keep on doing every quarter is I go through and I look at my product portfolio optimization. I decide what SKUs am I keeping, what SKUs am I getting rid of, and I'm also having a look at in terms of these are the SKUs. I identify those SKUs and then I'll put on sale to my sales team. All right, guys, we only have 10 boxes of this left. Let's get rid of this, and I'll drop the pricing. Still making some profit, so or breaking even, but at the same time, we're not losing money on the product. And the whole thing being perishable and in frozen meats is you have a frozen chilled space that you need to have product that consistently turns around, and anything that's taking up space there is just stopping you from selling faster products that you can actually sell through faster at a later stage.
Yeah, that's really fascinating about sort of the balance between getting it out the door perishable and then sort of, I guess, the costs on hand of holding on to stock, because you said some of those perishables can last up to a year, but that's effectively money sitting on the table at that point because you've paid for that raw product and now you need to turn that around. So it's actually not very useful keeping that for a 6-month period, for example, even if it doesn't go off. Then moving the conversation maybe more towards like the growth that you've maybe had as going from working in the corporate to being an owner of a business. You usually worked in logistics before in your corporate experience, and now you're still involved with logistics as a business owner. Can you say there's been any like differences in the way that's worked, or you've thought about logistics in a different way since you've been the owner of the business as opposed to being part of the business?
Yeah, it's completely different, right? I think the interesting thing is running a branch. Like, I was 26 years old when I ran a branch with about 450 people, warehouse, sales, and distribution, right? I now have 3 people in my operations, and I have 6 sales team. And what I've come to realize is that my resources are super limited. I've got to actually choose what I want to do, and you're generally wearing more than one hat. You know, as opposed to me being in a formal corporate structure, I'm like, here's a bill, capture that bill, ma'am, make sure it's paid, etc., etc. I am now the person capturing that bill. I am the person now making those payments to those vendors. So the other element to it is that, you know, normally when you're in corporate, you tend to be given a budget, right? You're given a budget, and it's like, oh, I've got $1 million rand or $1 million, whatever it is. This is my monthly expenses, etc., etc. When it's your own money on the table, the risks become a lot more apparent and a bit more real, I suppose.
Yeah.
So you're playing with your own funds. That's something that it became really apparent to me. And I think, you know, when you're starting out, there's a nervousness around that. I'm no longer nervous about that. And I think it's back to your inventory management. It's back to your cash flow management. How are you actually paying suppliers? How are you, you know, making sure that you get your sales and et cetera, et cetera. So that's like sort of something that's critical. I think my advice, though, to new entrepreneurs and to small business owners is your time is also a super valuable resource. The thing behind that is that when I first came in, I identified, again, still corporate, these are all the things I'm going to be changing. And then I'm like, you tend to get strangled. So you've got to literally choose what are the battles that you want to focus on, invest your time, and get the wins for those specific ones. So really choose the initiatives that you want to drive based on the resources that you have at present.
Yeah, I mean, something I've kind of learned myself through the clothing side of things is that as you do when you start out a new process, you know, as you were saying, you kind of had to get comfortable with, you know, spending your own funds and really kind of evaluating that. And I think with the clothing side, it's for me been very much a process of taking like a lot of responsibility in the sense of on a very active level, almost on a daily level. I think typically in the past, I would kind of, like a cash flow, for example, I would do it maybe like once a month. In the beginning, I didn't even have one. So you kind of go through these, like, I guess, learning phases of then kind of dialing in and adjusting your processes to kind of meet the needs of what you have to fulfill, essentially. And it makes such a big difference. You can suddenly you're so much more knowledgeable about the things that go on the day-to-day, you know, the hour-to-hour, even to that level. Yeah, I know it definitely rings true that, you know, in terms of just becoming familiar with those processes, and running your own business is a really hard sort of journey to begin with, because there's so much to kind of take on board.
Something I want to add on as well is, like, sometimes it's also good to take the best practices that you have from business and pull that into your own business, right? From corporate into your own business. One of the things that I used to do really well in corporate was definitely processes, procedures, and at the same time reporting. And what I found myself doing was the last couple of, like, the first 3 months, or first 2 to 3 months, I was just drinking from the fire hose, right? So it was literally changing my entire warehouse, doing this, doing that, to the extent that I was not able to look at my KPIs. And I started like, okay, what are the KPIs of my business? Let's start getting into that. What's the sales? What's my sales versus previous year? What's the growth? What's my debtors? And now I'm actually investing the time every single week to track that on a weekly basis to make sure that my business is performing where I want it to actually get to. And so that's something business owners have got to be clever with their times. And if you're not measuring the results, and if you're not measuring what's important in your business, you're just going to be rolling from time to time without seeing the opportunity to continuously improve.
No, most definitely. I mean, I think those are actually really good natural traits that you probably have. I don't think everyone has that kind of like desire to kind of really sort of, I think particularly in a more corporate-y space, people kind of feel maybe a little bit more comfortable. So they kind of just do their thing and they fulfill their role, and then they kind of, they're part of the process. But I think the fact that you develop those sort of almost like natural habits of wanting to do those things has probably helped you quite a lot, actually, because then instinctively going into owning a business, suddenly you've got all these kind of things automatically popping up. Whereas I think for most people, maybe if they go from a corporate space into running their own business, suddenly these are like all questions or things that they've never maybe necessarily thought of. And suddenly it becomes kind of a big learning curve for them. So I think that probably helps you. You know, if I'm looking to start my own business, myself, that sells perishable products or food-related products, what, in your opinion, do you feel are the most prominent challenges that I'll face?
Is it more like you're starting this business up from scratch? You're starting as a brand new entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So essentially, looking at your business, looking at your idea, the idea is, what are the value that you're bringing to the market and to your customers? What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And I think what I would normally go through thereafter is just, weirdly enough, I had to go through the process of, doing a business plan because I needed to get funding. But what I appreciated from that business plan was that it actually had me go through all the different elements of this business. And it forced me to start looking at the different elements. And if you invest a good amount of time in that business plan, by the time you end that business plan, you'll either know whether this is for you or whether it's not for you. So, when you're looking at that, just maybe do the homework, make sure that you have an idea of the numbers, go through that. You've also got to determine, what are you doing in terms of, like, you've got to look at the route to market. Firstly, you're going to have are you going to have your own premises? Are you going to have you need a freezer room, right? So are you going third party? You need to look at what are the costs that you can do for that. One of the things I would do is, you wouldn't need to go and invest in a whole facility like I have and buy everything. You could always start small and use third party. And, it might cost you a bit more premium, but at the same time, it's a smaller investment. No lease, no this, no that. But you get that ability to test your concept to see if it's going to work. And then you can take it thereafter and go forward with it. The other aspects to look at is, who are your suppliers, negotiating those payment terms. And I think that's kind of critical because, again, every business, especially a younger business, can make or break based on working capital. At the time that you've got to pay those suppliers, have you actually already sold your product? And so negotiating really good payment terms with your suppliers is good. And if you think of the likes of most retailers, right, such as ShopRite, Pick and Pay, etc., generally those guys, they generally have 90 days worth of payment terms. So you're essentially, paying somebody whole product. They sold the product probably 3 or 4 or 5 times over by the time that they've had to pay back to the supplier. So that's critical. Managing that working capital, I think, is interesting. Understanding your sales, right? How are you going to sell the product? And firstly, before you even go to that, what channels are you servicing? Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Or are you a combination of both? Are you going to be using your own sales team? Are you going to be using a sales agency? You're going to have a website. Those are the different elements. Distribution is another point of it as well, because especially if it's refrigerated product, perishable product, you need refrigerated transportation. So how are you going to be handling those sort of different elements in terms of it? So there's quite a bit, but I think the whole idea is, if you did a business plan and you go through that entire process of understanding your route to market, understanding your product portfolio, what are you selling? Also doing an analysis. If you're not unique in the market and you're selling a Me Too product, you've got to do the competitive analysis out there. Look at what your competitors are selling in the market. Look at what pricing that they're currently at. Look at what pricing you can get from your suppliers, and then understand the margin that your competitors are making, and also the margin that you are capable of making. So that'll allow you to understand your brand positioning. Do I want to be above my competitor because I have a better value product? Do I want to be below? But generally, the margins that the margins that retail generally takes probably standard across, should be generally standard. It's not always the case, but should be standard across the different suppliers. So if you understand the margins that your customers are looking to have if you're selling business to business, then you need to build that into your costing in order to know and work backward from there to see whether or not you'll be able to be competitive or whatever the case might be. But just want to stress, do the homework, do the numbers, make sure that you've got your sales forecast, make sure that you know what your monthly costs are from a third party, what the volumes are that you expect to get out there. And then use those at a later stage once the business comes into play, use those as your targets to see whether you're hitting what you forecast. I can tell you right now, I'm 50% behind my target. 50% behind my target because I was way too bullish on what I thought I was going to do. I thought I was going to launch e-com a lot sooner, right? It took me a lot more longer. I thought I was going to have a lot more salespeople. So those are the things that one has to look at and build in. So the business plan's a good starting point. It's never ever going to realize like that, but it'll help you identify whether this is a worthwhile venture to look.
Amazing. Thanks. So the final question we have for you is, I personally enjoy this question the most because I think a lot of business owners struggle with this question. They don't feel a bit uncomfortable to answer. But what does success look like for family food? I'm talking in the medium term. You said obviously you guys are 50% behind where you want to be. And if you were to sort of give us an idea of what does success look like to you for the business, how would you articulate that?
Yeah, for sure. So, in the next 1 to 1.5 years, I wanted to double my revenue. I'm a big, hairy, audacious kind of guy. I'm going to stick it out there and I'm going to go and balls to the wall and try to get it as best as I possibly can, right? If I fall short, I'll still deliver way better than just setting a mediocre goal. So definitely wanted to double on the revenue for year one. That's still it's not going to get there. But hopefully I start getting closer to that target. I do need to look at increasing my number of reps. So I need to get up to at least 15 reps and by the end of 1.5 years at least, which means sourcing vehicles, getting reps on the road, and probably looking at different channels as well. Because right now we're B2C. There might be an opportunity to go into B2B. We've launched e-com. Success for me on e-com would be having e-com being at least 30% of my revenue number. If we make that, that's going to put a smile on my face. It's just a lot more margin on the table, right? Years 2, 3, 4, and 5, looking at expanding into other provinces. Just getting multi-provincial. Look at maybe BC, Alberta, Quebec, possibly. Just trying to follow where the population is of the country, and making sure that I have people that are representative and offering those people in those different territories the opportunity. Eventually, lastly, maybe the US at some later stage. But by then, I'll probably be gray and old and ready for retirement.
Amazing. Thanks. It was actually interesting hearing you speak about that because you have more of a solid idea where you'd like to take the business. As you said, it's one thing having a plan, and it's another executing that. Doesn't play out the way that you plan it, but at least that gives you a direction. I think that's what you were saying earlier, but have a direction for your business, work towards that, and then make the changes as you go. But I just wanted to conclude the podcast there and say thanks a lot for your time. It was some amazing insight, and appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Always good to give back and help some young entrepreneurs go down the road. But happy to have had the chat to connect and communicate.